So let us have a prayer and then we'll get started. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, we thank you for how you have called us to follow you and to serve you. Give us open eyes, ears, and hearts so that we may learn from you and from one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Bev.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for coming. I want to begin where we should always begin, which is with scripture. And we decided today to begin with a spiritual guidepost from the New Testament. And we believe, let me go back one slide here. We believe that this is an example of an exemplary partnership in ministry. The people in Philippi and Paul, they have truly built relationships for the mission. So we want to use them as our guideposts today. And I invite you to hear Paul speaking pastor to people. I thank my God every time I mention you in my prayers. I'm thankful for all of you every time I pray, and it's always a prayer full of joy. I'm glad because of the way you've been my partners in the ministry of the gospel from the time you first believed it until now. I'm sure about this. The one who started a good work in you will stay with you to complete the job by the day of Christ Jesus. I have good reason to think this way about all of you because I keep you in my heart. You all are my partners in God's grace, both during my time in prison and in the defense and support of the gospel. God is my witness that I feel affection for all of you with the compassion of Christ Jesus. This is my prayer, that your love might become even more and more rich with the knowledge and all kinds of insight. I pray this so that you will be able to decide what really matters. And so you will be sincere and blameless on the day of Christ. I pray that you will then be filled with the fruit of righteousness, which comes from Jesus Christ, in order to give glory and praise to God. This passage is really one of my favorites, not only for my own experience of local church ministry, but certainly as a district superintendent. I've had such a great opportunity to see a different view, and I'm so thankful for the ministry of all of our staff parish chairs and all of our pastors who are working all the time to strengthen their relationships in the local church, not only with each other, but with the congregation. The takeaways that I get from Paul and Philippi, the pastor and the people are always partners. God remains at work over time and across appointments. God does not stop working because there's a change in ministers. God is always working across time. Grace is a part of our partnership. Love and insight grow when relationships and as relationships grow. And I think it's very important to remember that we all as leaders get to decide what really matters and what doesn't matter so much. I get a lot of phone calls, and some of my phone calls that I have with staff parish chairs, they're sharing with me things that really matter a lot. And sometimes I get some calls about things that really don't matter so much. We work our way through all those with love and affection. But sometimes it is important to find out what really matters, what is most critical for the mission, and what doesn't matter so much. And part of your wisdom as team members is to decide what really matters, as Paul says. And as I'm saying this afternoon, also what might not matter. Our hope is to be found sincere and to be found blameless in our work as Christians. And what we desire is fruitfulness. And that is the goal of every pastoral appointment and the goal of every church ministry, to be fruitful, to honor God, and to make disciples. So this work is really important for us. And I think as we begin today, I want to be sure that we start where we should have started, which is with scripture. So Laura is going to work with you all a few minutes on what it means to be on SPRC in light of your discipleship. And some of you have said yes to this work. You've done it, as the bishop said, many years. Others of you are brand new. No matter what, you were chosen by your nominations team, your lay leadership group, because you were seen to have had the spiritual maturity to be able to do this important work. All of our leadership roles are important, but as you probably already know, staff parish is a very tender and significant position. And so Laura's going to walk us through what it means to be a part of this work.
Thank you, Bev. Yes, I know that some of you perhaps are new to staff parish, and others of you have been on staff parish throughout the years as you have been a part of a church community. Perhaps this is your second or third or even fourth time to be on the staff parish committee. But regardless, we are serving out of our discipleship. We're serving out of our ministry, our following of Jesus Christ. And so I want to offer 4 ways that we do this, or 4 functions that 4 roles that we play in this. And the first one is that we are to be about building strong relationships, whether that's between pastor and staff, or the pastor and the staff parish committee, or between the pastor and the congregation. We are about building strong relationships. Now, there's a couple ways that we can do that. And I would say first and foremost, it is to be a good listener. We should be a good listener. We should listen to people's concerns. We should hear people with compassion. Secondly, we can ask good questions as a part of building relationship. Ask good questions that get to deeper matters. If someone shares with you a concern that they have about how things are going in the congregation, then maybe a question to get to a deeper matter would be, why is this important to you? Perhaps if you're talking with the pastor about their continuing education plans, you might ask, what did you learn from this experience? Take some time for reflection with them. Perhaps if you're helping the staff parish committee think through a course of action, ask the question, what will be different? What will you want to be different if we take this course of action? So think about good questions that get to deeper matters. That can be a really great way to build relationships. And then another way to build strong relationships, especially with pastors and staff, is to get specific and to get personal. Know the personal the personal needs, the personal information and details about a pastor's life. For example, within reason, of course, but for example, it's important to be able to affirm their life and their call. So it's important to know perhaps why the pastor always wants to take Tuesday off as their day off. It may be that it's because they need to help one of their children to do a special activity, or perhaps they're taking care of a parent and that's the day that they need to do that. So it's important that you know specifically those personal things in the pastor's life. Know what is their favorite flower, their favorite food, know what their hobbies are, get a sense of their personal disciplines, their spiritual disciplines, and the things that they enjoy. So let's go to the next slide. We are about building strong relationships, and we also, secondly, are about staying spiritually strong. This is important for a staff parish committee member, because the work that you're doing is truly spiritual work. So it's important that you are engaged in daily prayer and devotion, in regular worship, that you are staying grounded. And even when we have those difficult conversations or we have to deal with tough issues, it's important that we have that spiritual grounding within us to be able to do that well. If we have to have a hard conversation, if we have to offer correction to someone, or when the answer to the question is not what someone wants to hear, then we have to be able to have that spiritual strength. I think it's important too to in those situations to be able to ask, where do we see God's grace in this? In this tough situation, where do we see God's grace? Because God's grace is always there. All right, next slide. So we build strong relationships, we stay spiritually strong, and it's important that we know the details about how the church is to fulfill legal and ethical responsibilities related to staff. Now, we're going to touch on some of these things a little bit later, but it's important that you have the knowledge of what the discipline says about Staff Parish Relations Committee and their work. It's important that we know human resource matters, compensation rules. It's important that we know about ethical misconduct policies and procedures, safe sanctuary policies and procedures, social media policies and procedures. I've heard it said that the committees in our church, say the finance committee, they are the group of leaders in our congregation that help us be good stewards of our financial resources, and that the trustees help us be good stewards of our property resources. The nominations and lay leadership team help us be good stewards of the people's gifts in the congregation, and that the staff parish committee, they help us be good stewards of our pastor and staff. And so a part of your responsibility on staff parish is to make sure that we're being good stewards and that we're doing things legally, correctly, and ethically. So next slide, please. So we want to build strong relationships. We stay spiritually strong. We know the details and know that they're being attended to faithfully. And we live out our baptismal vows by being a trusting, non-anxious presence, so that positive conversations can take place, so that deeper discipleship can be accomplished in the church. I think one of the best things that we can do to be a non-anxious presence is to lean into our faith that God is that God is the creator of all things, and that God is present with us. The Holy Spirit is present with us, and that come what may, all will be well because of God's presence. I also think it's important, if you ever feel that you're that it's difficult to be that non-anxious presence, remember that you are not alone. There are other, hopefully, I feel sure in almost all of our congregations this is true, that there are other wise, experienced, and spiritually mature persons in your congregation that can help you. Your district superintendent can also help you if you find yourself in a situation where you're not sure what to do. If you look at the next page, I want you to mark in your notes paragraph 258.2. That is the description of the Staff Parish Relations Committee and their job description. There's lots of information there, but there are a couple of words that are used at the very beginning of the duties of a staff parish committee. And those words are encourage, strengthen, nurture, support, and respect. And those words are worthy of our reflection, worthy of us thinking about what that really means for us to be an encouraging presence, a nurturing presence for the pastor and staff. And so I've made a list of a few things, and you might want to put your own ideas in the chat about how we could define how each of these could be played out in our setting, in our situation. So what might it mean to strengthen the pastor? Well, it would mean to pray for your pastor. It would mean to truthfully and appropriately defend your pastor. It would mean to speak the truth in love to your pastor. So what might it mean to encourage your pastor? It would mean to do that in public and in private, to encourage in word and in deed. It must be done authentically and not just because the district superintendent told you to do that. It would be important to give helpful feedback and correction, feedback and correction that builds up and does not tear down. And then what might it mean to nurture and support your pastor? Well, it might mean to care personally, like I mentioned earlier, to know specifically what's going on in a person's life so that caring can happen very practically and very personally. How many pastors, I know there's a lot of pastors on our call today, but how often have, when we've been sick and a parishioner has brought us some chicken soup, that's a sign of caring personally. We might guard our pastor's time for prayer and study and for vacation. And we can also help guarantee available resources so that if a pastor needs to purchase a book or needs to attend a continuing education event, that they have some resources in order to do that. What might it mean to respect your pastor? It would mean to speak honorably of the pastor, even when others do not. To speak with honor, with authentic honor, in an honorable way. To respect the pastor would mean to also guard family and private boundaries. It would mean to always display a willingness to work through disagreements and differences, a willingness to work through those. Paragraph 258 is important, and there will be a copy of that in the handout packet that will be provided after our seminar, that will be available on the conference website. So just keep that in mind, that handout. In that paragraph, if we'll turn to the next slide, please. In that paragraph, it gives us the information about the kind of what I call the nuts and bolts of the SPRC, and just know that members are duly nominated and elected, that you would have at least 5 people, no more than 9 people on the committee, as well as the lay member to annual conference and the lay leader. They're structured in 3-year classes to make sure that the same people are not always serving on the staff parish committee, and also that you have people on the committee that are learning, but also people that have experience on the committee. And of course, if you have someone who is paid that is on staff, they would not be members of the staff parish committee. And someone's immediate family member, the sister of the music director should not serve on the staff parish committee. If you are on or have been on the nominations and lay leadership team, and you are considering people in your congregation to serve on the staff parish committee, then it should be people who regularly attend worship, who participate in missions, who are active and engaged in Bible study and learning, and who give generously All of those things are signs of spiritual maturity, and that's the kind of person that needs to be serving on the staff parish committee. We'll turn to the next slide. Someone I think was asking in the chat, yes, this recording will be available later for folks, and it would be a great time a great way to share with your whole committee if your whole committee is not in attendance for this seminar. In the discipline, it says that that this committee should meet at least quarterly, 4 times a year, but of course additional meetings can be held and probably should be held throughout the year. In just a little while, we are going to look at different things that can happen at different times of the year. So hopefully that'll give you a sense of how those meetings can be scheduled and why we would be having those meetings at particular times of the year. The bishop can call a staff parish meeting. The district superintendent can do so, the pastor, the chairperson, or someone accountable to the committee, say a staff person could request a staff parish meeting. The committee cannot meet without the knowledge of the pastor or the superintendent. This is really important for transparency and for open and honest conversation. And of course, the staff parish committee meets in closed session and observes confidentiality. In the packet, I believe there will be a sample confidentiality pledge that we encourage people, new people, especially new people, but new committees at the beginning of each year to sign that confidentiality pledge to just lift up the importance of that and to help everyone remember the importance of confidentiality. The next slide just highlights some of the administrative tasks that a staff parish committee needs to be aware of. You can look at it in terms of just the communication that has to take place between pastor and staff, congregation, and DS. And then you want to make sure that you're in some sort of contact and connection with the district superintendent. You want to make sure that you're on the district mailing list so that you're getting important communication. You want to make sure that your information on the conference database is correct so that you can get that information. And then to offer that annual evaluation and assessment, to do that, to do the annual assessment, but also to do that in a regular way, to discover a way to offer encouraging and helpful feedback throughout the year. I did want to say something else about confidentiality. I saw there was a question in the chat about notifying the pastor. That's a good practice, Rod, with that. And you want to make sure that communication is open and that there's a sense of transparency. But that's an important rule to just discuss what you have said that you would talk about in that. So. And your superintendent in your district may have some additional guidance on that. I think I often get a question about confidentiality and why and how that can be tricky. And I think when there are things that need to be shared with the whole congregation, that it's important that all of the staff parish committee agree together on what that is and how that should take place. So if there's something that the whole congregation needs to know, not necessarily that they want to know, but what they need to know, then that should be agreed upon by the staff parish with guidance from the pastor or from the district superintendent. That is a much healthier way to make sure that the congregation is staying informed than where you break confidentiality and a person shares something here or something there. So think through as a team how you're going to handle that. And I believe that is all that I have at this moment. And Bev is going to give us a little more information about conducting meetings.
Thank you, Laura. I really want to talk about how to run a great meeting, a meeting where you can all enter with an intent to serve and then leave with a feeling of having served faithfully. So I really want to talk about how to lead a conscientious meeting, but also a compelling meeting so that people are eager to be with you and to engage the work. And so I want to go through a couple of things that might help. If you're a chair or vice chair, preparation for the meeting is really important. An agenda that's sent out ahead of time. The first couple of things on the agenda are always going to be the things that you attend to most carefully before you're tired or weary. So be aware of what's at the top of your agenda. Always, you should begin, as I began today, with a word from Scripture. It might be a brief devotional from your own life, something that you read daily or could share. And always should really be bookended in prayer at the beginning and the end. I can't say enough about that. I also encourage all of our staff parish committees to have a yearly review of paragraph 258.2. That's the paragraph Laura was talking about a few minutes ago. I like to see this done in January. It's a helpful annual reminder for those who continue on the committee during their 3-year period, and it's a great way to welcome new people. Just to remind the new people on the committee, this is our business. And you'll see some of those good verbs that Laura went over too. It's very important to elect a vice chair and a secretary. A vice chair is really important because you don't want to meet only if the chair can be there. Sometimes the chair is called out of town, they have a family situation, and you still want to be able to have a meeting and not have to reschedule. You'll know in your own discernment if it's an important enough meeting to reschedule if the chair can't be there. But there's no reason a vice chair can't be super helpful and also be learning as an apprentice for their future leadership. A secretary is important because sometimes it's hard to run the meeting and keep appropriate minutes. So do not only elect a secretary, but honor that person's work and thank them for the things that they'll do to keep documentation and archives. It's important to set ground rules about the meeting, the sacred task, the confidentiality, but also the length of the meetings. I've been at some churches in my ministry where we always held it to an hour. Sometimes we went to 90 minutes. If we were going to be over 90 minutes, we shared with the team that it would be a long meeting. We provided food or at least a snack or refreshment so that people did not become weary in the hard work that it sometimes takes. Take good minutes, archive documentation, keep a notebook that can be shared from chair to chair. Include a little bit of time of learning. Don't forget, learn about someone's ministry, invite someone on the staff to come and share what they do. That's a pleasant way to encourage them. It's not any sort of inquisition about their ministry, but it's a way for you to learn what people do and to really encourage them. Hear those reports from your pastor and your staff. If you expect your pastor to make a report at staff parish, when they come to your church, as you're getting acquainted, share that with them. Say it helps us to know, for example, how many visits you may have made. We don't want to know to whom, of course, that's a confidentiality issue. But how you've been visiting, your patterns, what's important to you, and also just the expectations that might exist there. And once you've shared the expectations with your pastor, be sure and evaluate them based on the expectations, not on the expectations that you have not explained or have not shared. That's hard. Review decisions that you've made at the end of the meeting. The chair might say, okay, let's just recap. Tonight we have decided X, Y, and Z. And then you'll want to go over any action items. Who will do what? Will a certain member of the committee make a commitment to visit with a staff member during the month, come back and give a report? Be sure at the bottom, I often, and I've encouraged my chairs to use a little block at the end on the agenda to put the action items. That can really be helpful. Now we're just going to real quickly walk through the year with you. This is a little bit of a calendar, a schedule for how you might walk through the year. If you're a new chair, maybe it's especially helpful to you. If you have been a chair before, you might just think about this. If you haven't done this before, you might consider 2021 a good chance to do this. I'm going to talk about the first quarter, January through March. Again, if Staff Parish is mandated by the Book of Discipline to meet at least 4 times a year, you might consider these your 4 meetings. You may need to meet more than that. You may decide to meet monthly. Most of my congregations have met sometimes monthly through the school year, maybe a little break in the summer, sometimes every other month, and sometimes only quarterly. It depends on the need. And I would have to also say it depends on the size of your staff. January through March, hold that orientation and that welcome meeting. That's a great time for some refreshments when the pandemic is over and we can be together. It's a good time to see people face to face and to thank them. It's a great time, as I said a moment ago, to review 258.2, talk about what our business is. It's a good time to review any goals that your staff has given you in the past year, and also to be aware of any anniversary dates. In the last church I served before I became a superintendent, we made a special effort to honor our lay staff on their anniversary dates. For us as clergy, our anniversary date's always July 1st, at least most of the time it is. But for our lay staff, they may have started at any period of the year. And it's nice to know when their anniversary dates are so that you can send them a card. You can acknowledge it in the church newsletter. You can give them a hand in worship one day to thank them. They might be beginning a landmark year, a 5th year or 10th year. And that means a lot to our lay staff. And I love that. We'll review relationships. You know who your pastors are. You probably know who your staff are, but in a large church, not everybody knows all the staff members or what their job descriptions are. You'll want to be aware of what clergy are affiliated with your church. It may be a pastor or a clergy member who's on leave. It may be a retired pastor. Those people are important, and you are their main connection to the church. And you also want to talk about who your candidates are for ministry. Review those every year. One of the things that's often disregarded in the discipline about the work of Staff Parish is identifying future ministry candidates. Who among you sitting in the sanctuary in leadership might have a vocation of ministry ahead for them? Your job as Staff Parish is to look for those people, to have bright eyes to see them, and to help nurture them through a process of discernment. And maybe most importantly, in the first quarter of the year, go ahead and think about your plan for how you'll deal with any rumors that come up or any conflict. Think ahead about what your practice will be. We find that is so much better than getting in the midst of it. And I'll say more about that in a little while, but getting in the midst of it and not being able to stay in relationship. So think ahead, just like I was reading from the passage in Philippians. It's important to be able to discern what is most important. So I'm going to turn it back over, in fact, to Laura. And Laura's going to walk us through the second 6 months of the year, the second 3 months.
Yeah, in the second quarter, there may be 2 different ways for you to think about the important work in April, May, and June. One way is if you are not anticipating a change of pastoral leadership, then you may definitely want to look at the goals that you have helped your clergy and staff set, the expectations, and review those and see how things are going and adjust as appropriate. it would be a great time to just review the housing policy and the needs and the parsonage policy and those things, just to know, make sure that everything is in good working order. It may be an important time to review legal matters such as lay staff compensation, the ethical misconduct policy, any social media policies, just a time to do some of that review. But if you are anticipating a change of pastors, then you're really going to be focused on that. Normally, under normal circumstances, you would probably know that by April. And so it would be really important for your committee to focus on the information that would come from your district office in the moving packet and to follow all of those suggestions and to consider all of that information in your work. You will definitely need to think about your parsonage, make sure that there's an inspection that has taken place, really work with your trustees and your parsonage committee to make sure that the housing is in order. And then you're going to be a major part for the congregation and for the staff in terms of the congregation saying goodbye, and the staff person or the clergy person saying goodbye, and then saying hello to a new person. So those would be some things that would be important during the second quarter of the year. Now, Kathy, why don't you take us into the summer, later in the summer?
Thank you, Laura. Yes, as you get into the summer months, you think, well, we can take a little bit of a break. But if you have that pastoral change, now is a good time to begin thinking about those job descriptions for the rest of your staff. You have, as Laura mentioned earlier, in the Book of Discipline on page 258.2, a very detailed description of you as a committee member on the SPRC. But now look at your staff, especially with pastoral changes. Maybe there needs to be some adjustments to those job descriptions. And July, August, September is a great time to look at that. When's the last time you looked at your job description? Maybe there are things that have been added to those job descriptions, or things, especially now in this pandemic, that maybe don't apply anymore and aren't being able to be done. So certainly a time to review those job descriptions. You also need to be clear who the staff report to. Of course, they report to SPRC. I saw someone in the chat said they actually have a member of the SPRC be a liaison for each of their staff folks. If you have more than one staff members, that might be a good policy for you or something that you would want to consider. You set goals maybe in the first quarter. Don't wait till the end of the year to talk about whether those goals are being met or not. At least quarterly, there should be some conversations. The packet that will be distributed at the end of this session will include a lot of guidelines that I think every SPRC should review. Some of those include how do you establish the goals for an employee, and how do you decide if they're an exempt or a non-exempt employee, or if they're a contract worker. There are some very specific guidelines that are put out by the Department of Labor. I've been asked before if this is conference mandates, but actually, even though many nonprofits have felt that they were not governed by the Department of Labor, those same rules apply to the churches that apply to individual businesses. Again, if you have individual questions, you can send those to Londa Wallace and she'll share those with the end of this session. If they're church-specific questions, you'll want to hold those, discuss those maybe with your district superintendent, or as Laura shared, I am a consultant to the district and also to the conference, and I can be reached, and my contact information will be in the information that is shared. Churches also have the safe sanctuary policies that have been established. Many times we forget to share those, maybe with contractors that are on our premises. Safe sanctuary should apply to anyone that is spending time on your property, and know that we expect them to to follow those guidelines. An established policy and a way to do evaluations. You know, the district administrators hold all of you responsible for your pastoral evaluation. They make sure those are done each year. And I think you should provide that same level of evaluation to any of your staff. How do you determine if they're doing a good job? The goals that were set at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of a pastoral change certainly should be the first thing you look at, but then you should also have other development plans maybe that have been established for things that that employee thinks that they would like to work toward. You would establish and review any continuing education that they might need, as well as the pastor, and then work on those development plans. Certainly look throughout the year to see if goals need to be changed. If you do this in January, certainly don't think that those goals might not need to be revised sometime during the year. Again, let me know if there's ways that I can help your church individually with job descriptions or employee classifications, maybe how to conduct some evaluations, or maybe even dealing with some performance issues if that is what's happening in your church at this point. I hope that the handouts that you'll receive later will be very helpful and give you some additional information.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk about the last quarter of the year, October through December. It's important that the church profile is updated annually, and it's on the church dashboard. There is one login that everyone uses for the church dashboard. Your minister, your secretary, your treasurer would have that login. Again, it's only one per church, and before we change anything, we ask that you check with the others, because once it's changed, they may not be able to log in. But remember that your church profile needs to be updated annually on your church dashboard. Regarding report to the charge conference, there are no official forms, but it may be important that the PPR share any seminary students that you might have, as well as candidates for ministry. That's part of what the PPR needs to report. Any unfinished business, if you've met quarterly or how often you're going to meet throughout the year, there may be items that you want to finish up. You may say that we're going to do this throughout the year, and be sure to finalize those things with by the end of the year. Your move advisory forms. Every PPR committee and every minister is to submit an advisory form. If there's we wish for our pastors to stay. We wish for there to be a consultation with the superintendent. If our minister is retiring, those are the items that are on the advisory form. And again, everyone we should get an advisory form from every PPR committee and every minister. And this year, the deadline to have those forms to the conference, to the district office was January 6th. And following the advisory forms coming into the office, we will plan for the superintendent to have a consultation with you based on what's listed on the advisory form, but always feel free to reach out to your superintendent of the district office if there are other things you need to have consultations about. And I want to talk with you about forms and policies. We talked about the annual church profile. It should be done by December. The charge conference reports. Charge conferences are normally held between September and November, and there are documents on your church dashboard related to the charge conference forms. Your clergy compensation report was discussed a little earlier. That is, the PPR committee works on making sure the clergy compensation report is complete. Clergy assessments. It's listed as May. We had a new process, but it is something that must be done annually. Your safe sanctuary policy, ongoing and refinements. It's important that your safe sanctuary policy is not only a copy in the file folder or a copy that's available at charge conference. It's important that the policy is implemented and that persons know where that policy is. From time to time, we'll have someone say, we haven't seen the policy in a number of years, but it is very important that there's a policy in place, that it's implemented so that our children and all others are safe. Your employee handbook question, do you have one? If not, it's important that you work on one and that it's reviewed and shared with your staff. And again, we talked about the advisory forms, how important they are, and that everyone should submit one.
Thank you, Londa. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of moving, but I really want to affirm the process of not moving, if that's okay. We are really working towards longer tenures. Research has really helped us to understand that pastors who stay in place and build the relationships are more fruitful and their churches grow at a better level than churches that experience transitions all the time. You can imagine during the pandemic that we are very eager to keep as many of our pastors in place as we can. All that being said, there will still be retirements. There'll still be folks graduating from seminary, pastors coming off of a leave of absence, going on a leave of absence. We will have moves inevitably, and we will be working on those this month, next month, March, and all the way through the first 6 months of the year. The church profile is really important. You'll see the phrase church profile this afternoon on 3 slides. That should tell you how important it is to us. I am amazed when I prepare for a consultation with a church and go to print it and have it with me and review it beforehand that the church has not updated it. It's very important to give us the most updated information. It's a wonderful springboard for our conversation. It's important that you meet with the pastor to discuss a move. Even if you're discussing just continuing on, make that a moment that's significant for the pastor and the team. And everyone's signature is important. That was harder this year with the pandemic, and kudos to all of you who sent me copies of email affirmations and just did an extra mile work with getting those things in. I want to talk about the consultation. Most of ours are probably going to be held on Zoom this year. The ones that aren't, I suspect will be held in the largest spaces that we have in churches, which is typically sanctuary, just in order that we might have caution during the COVID-19 pandemic. We take the consultation process very seriously, and I want to thank you because you do too. I have seen so many of you attempt to come out even in the cold and rain of winter to be together, to be present for these meetings, and they are very, very helpful to me. We talk about the church's mission and how it is best fulfilled. We take all of the consultation material into account when we meet as a cabinet. Our consultation is an advisory capacity. Sometimes we will get together in the cabinet and we emerge with decisions that are very much based in prayer. Sometimes pastors that might be expecting a move end up staying in their positions because that's what the mission of the church needs. And the opposite is indeed true as well. So the final decisions are made by the bishop and the cabinet after sharing the consultation information with each of the superintendents. So the mission of the church is just always our first priority. What's most important for the body of the church and most important for the ministry of all the connection of the annual conference. I want to also say that consultation is always happening. It does happen in those meetings in wintertime as we're preparing for transitions, but it also happens when I visit your church. Your superintendent wants to visit. I visited 3 churches today. They were all on digital platforms, but we do visit your churches. We look at your annual reports and your statistics. Enjoy visiting with pastors at clergy meetings. They share a lot with us there. In our network, I get to know many of our laity, and we also are always with pastors, especially continuing ed processes and involved with their lots of consultations are happening. As we wrap up this afternoon, and start to move to our where you'll get to meet your district superintendent and see him or her face to face. I want to talk a little bit about that active and preeminent and preparatory plan to approach differences. I have just fallen in love with this little slide from InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. This slide was actually created to help people approach cultural differences, but it can be used to approach any kind of difference. And I want to read it and look at it with you left to right. And a lot of folks usually, well, they'll tell me after the class we've done each year, this is really one of the most helpful things, and they take it back to their committees. Please notice that the way we go in, the posture we go into a relationship with is often really a part of the result of how it works out. When we go in with openness, acceptance, and trust and adaptability, and I see so many churches and staff parishes doing this, then when they meet up with the inevitable cultural differences between them and perhaps their new pastor or their new mission, there can be frustration. There can be misunderstanding, confusion, tension, embarrassment, aggression. I don't have to tell you that all the events that are in the news right now are leading to more and more dissonance that people experience everywhere they go. They're experiencing it at the grocery store, at the post office. They're experiencing it everywhere right now. Of course, we experience it in the church. But you see, if you go in on the green, as it shows there, with openness, acceptance, trust, and adaptability, you're more likely to stay green as you respond. Instead of criticizing or rationalizing or isolating, you're on the green and you're observing and inquiring and you're listening and initiating conversation. When we stay what we call on the green line, then our result would be understanding each other. It would be empathy, and it would be that deepening relationships happen. And remember, we are having our whole theme today of this workshop of deepening relationships for the mission. So there's a difference between going in on the green line when you're going into a new relationship, or even when you're going into anything, the posture you take, and going in on the red line. The goal is definitely to stay on the green. Again, this PowerPoint will be available for y'all in the packet, and you may want to show the slide at a meeting or share it on a Zoom call so that you can ask each of your folks to think about where they are and how they're approaching a relationship with a minister and the way they're approaching relationships with each other in the meeting. And last but not least, just a little bit of advice, and I'm sure we'll follow this up in our breakout rooms, about how to approach conflict and concerns that come up. Some of it comes up because there are cultural differences between the way the pastor was raised and the church he or she grew up in, their education, their geography, versus the way that they find themselves in a particular appointment. It's a cultural clash sometimes, and we want to approach it from that green perspective, but we also want to approach it with some principles. And again, this would be a good slide to share with your committee in January of the year before, as you're beginning. If you have a new pastor, it's a good one to do together at the very first meeting that your new pastor attends. How you handle complaints is really important. They must be put into writing. I think that's critical, and also that they state facts. I get a lot of conversations where they say people are saying. that our pastor does this or that, or doesn't do this or that. And I do ask for that to be put into writing and to be very specific. What is the issue? When did this happen? Is this a repeated pattern? Say more. Complaints must be signed. Anonymous letters will not be honored. I always ask, and I think you as chairs, for those of you who are on as chairs, always ask a person who comes to you with a complaint about the pastor, have you talked to the pastor about this? Sometimes the answer is no, I don't want to, I'm embarrassed, I don't want to talk about it. And for you all as the chair, we need to think about how this might be causing an unfortunate triangle between the committee, the person leveling the grievance, and the pastor. When I get an email from someone about their pastor, I always copy the pastor when I respond. I always want to make sure the pastor is aware of the conversation. And I'm pretty intent on not getting involved in the triangle there. It's best that everyone knows that this conversation is happening with me. For the second number 4, I just happened to notice I have 2 number 4s. Biblical conversations are a must. I encourage a good reading of that little part of Matthew 18, which shares what to do when there is a struggle. When you have a struggle with someone, first you go alone and just speak with them privately. If it doesn't work out, you invite 1 or 2 others to go with you. And only after those 2 conversations have not worked do you go as a congregation. Sometimes we tend to go right to a committee when we could have had a private conversation with the pastor. So for you, always encourage someone to go and speak to the pastor themselves. Keep the conversation open. Some congregants, I know this is not present company, but some congregants complain about the pastor because they want to slow the mission down. Things are changing in the church. It's stressful. We don't want all these changes that the pastor is bringing. And to complain about the pastor does tend to slow down the mission a little bit. Conversely, some pastors complain about their churches, and I get that too, as a way of avoiding the difficult tasks of ministry. So whenever there is just a complaining culture, we have to ask, how much energy are we using about all these complaints that we could be using to fulfill the mission of the church? So that's worth thinking about. If your church spends a whole lot of time in the complaint process, it might be good to be aware that this is slowing down your mission, and it's keeping your energy fixed on something that will not cause more disciples to be made. I always like to consider the motivation behind the complaint. Is someone upset with the pastor because things are changing and that's difficult? Is the pastor complaining about the church because they want to avoid something that's really difficult that's coming up? I don't always know what's going on, but I do want to always wonder what the motivation is behind the complaint. Lastly, and very importantly, receive the concerns. Have a place in your meeting structure where you can receive concerns that have been shared in writing and signed. But remember that you don't have to act on every concern. Your role is to receive the concern, but to use your collective discernment to decide if that's a concern that we need to act on at this time or not. So those are just some important things. And I can't say enough about how important it is to do this regularly in our meetings, and certainly at the beginning of someone's ministry, to ask ourselves, how will we handle it? Because like the previous slide showed us, the stuff in the middle is inevitable. The frustration, it's just a fact of living in a place where we're trying to understand each other. Misunderstanding is inevitable. Confusion is inevitable. Tension is inevitable. And so I often say to my congregations when I'm serving as a pastor, there will be a time when we don't get along. And at the beginning, they will all laugh and say, oh, we can't imagine that. But sure as the world, it comes up. So deciding in how we'll handle it is real important. I'm going to go to our last slide. And since I've been using my screen as the sharing, I don't have a real list of the chat questions, but I want to call on Londa. We got about 5 minutes before we put y'all into your breakout rooms to meet your superintendents and spend some time with them. If there are any questions that we can answer.
One of the questions is about copies of the slides, and we've shared that packets will be put together.
Yeah, and let me say a little bit about that. We decided to see how all your breakout rooms go and what questions you have that it might help us to put information in the resource packet. So sometime this week, we're going to be putting the whole resource packet up onto the website with this recorded conversation, and you can use any of that in ways that are helpful to y'all. But we have a cabinet meeting tomorrow, and we're going to poll the superintendents to see what came up in their chats, so that we would maybe be able to give you some more handouts if that's helpful.
There was also a question about staff evaluations.
Okay. If that's a question about lay staff, let me share a little bit of information that I might have that could help. I have been the senior pastor of a large staff, and it was tempting for us to do the staff evaluations at the very same time that we were doing the clergy evaluations. But we found that we weren't giving the time that they really deserved. We were so focused on getting in information for the conference on the clergy that we didn't have a chance to really affirm and really spend deep time with our lay staff. So we decided to evaluate our lay staff on their anniversaries. Again, we knew when those times were. We celebrated them in our newsletter and bulletin and in worship, but we also did some evaluations. And what I've done, and I'll be glad to share this in the resource pack if it's helpful, is a bit of a 360, where about 5 people weigh in with an instrument about the lay staff's performance. And then the staff parish takes a look at it, and a couple of people from staff parish meet with that person and talk about their competencies, a lot of thanksgiving for what they do, but also their growing edges. Every year we assume that every staff member has growing edges because we can all improve. And I think that's an important thing to have as a sort of a core value. None of us are beyond getting better. We all want to get better. And I think that is one of the best ways to do staff evaluations, is to have an expectation that we all want to get better.
We also had a question regarding staff evaluations. Part of the presentation we shared about the staff reporting to the PPR committee, but we need to touch on their reporting to the pastor as well, the role of the pastor and the staff, as well as their reporting to the minister.
And I do think that even just a modest and humble organizational chart is really, really helpful for a church to really know. I served, probably one of my favorite appointments was in a very small church in Rowan County, North Carolina, in what was the Salisbury district. And it was just me and a part-time pianist and a custodian. But we had an agreement about how we would relate to each other, and how we would each relate to staff parish in our own ways, but week to week we would relate with me in a capacity of being able to offer some guidance for their ministries. So I think in the smallest of churches and in the largest of churches, an organization chart is really important. In a large church, the senior pastor must be responsible for the staff. That relationship is critical. The senior pastor's own hand, and I think that as long as you have that defined, it's good to go ahead and wrestle that out and figure that out, because if people are on different pages, then it can be confusing for staff even week to week. But I'll be glad to work with you on that. If you do have a staff and you're thinking, what would a simple organizational chart look like, and how would it work? I'd be glad to help, and I know our other superintendents would too. We don't do a lot with laity. We are not responsible for hiring or firing laity, but we can give you a few ideas about how the pastor might be working with that person as a partner in the ministry.
Mm-hmm. And it would also be important to kind of dovetail that with the safe sanctuary policy, if there's any misconduct or any abuse in terms of, how that gets processed and how that's handled. Make sure you include that in that organizational chart and in that understanding.
We also had a question about who makes up the PPR committee, and it references no family member, no spouse, but someone asked about people in the same household. How would you?
Yeah, I think the discipline's word is members of in the same household should not serve on the staff parish committee.
We have one more. Someone else has asked about the Book of Discipline definition of young adult, and someone answered that under 40, as far as who would fall as a young adult. We've been asked about a sample of the handbook. They may be.
That would be maybe a sample of an employee handbook. Is that what you're referencing? That would be something that we could possibly connect you with through the resource packet.
Someone's also just asked about the organizational chart, so we'll see about including that as well.
Great. Thank you. Well, in just a few minutes, Laura's going to wrap us up, but in just a few minutes, we're going to go to the breakouts, which will be a little smaller and a little more intimate for you, and also a chance for you to see our other 6 superintendents, to see your very own. It may be a person you've met before many times. It may be somebody you've never met. So I hope that is an enjoyable process for you as we wrap up today. And our meeting will actually end from the breakout. When you all are finished, you're finished. But I'll turn it back to Laura.
Yes, and if any of your questions get kind of lost in the chat and so forth, make sure you direct those to your district superintendent, and we will do our very best to make sure that we get the information to you. I just want to encourage you to keep the mission of the church at your forefront in your work as a member of the staff parish committee. We are to be about following Jesus, making disciples for Christ, and transforming the world. That is why we do what we do in supporting, encouraging, and working with the pastor and staff in the church so that they can offer their best leadership to the whole congregation. So my prayers are with you in work that is full of joy and can also be very challenging. Prayers of discernment and wisdom for your work and for your walk. May the Lord bless you and keep you.